The Vegas Golden Knights have hit the skids after Mark Stone was put on injured reserve, and as a result, they find themselves in third place in the division. Plus, are the Vancouver Canucks pivoting to another high target impact player to acquire before the deadline? Plus, who is trading and who is buying and selling? We'll discuss all that on today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. You can download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we discuss the Vegas Golden Knights hitting a recent skid that coincides perfectly with the point in which they lost Mark Stone for the season. We'll talk about what's gone wrong and what Vegas needs to get themselves back on track and back up further into the Pacific Division standings. We'll also talk about the Vancouver Canucks continuing to try to keep themselves in the driver's seat in the Western Conference, and which Western Conference teams will be buying and which teams will be selling at the trade deadline on Friday. We'll discuss all that here today. My name is Seth Topol, host of Locked On Wild and one half of the dynamic duo of your Western Conference Tuesday show, and flying solo here today with Nick Morgan occupied for today in the midst of transitioning into a new job. So obviously he's got a lot going on. We're flying solo here today, and we start with the Vegas Golden Knights, who are in the midst of a bit of a skid that has seen them fall out of the second spot in the Pacific Division. That is a spot in which the Vegas Golden Knights have held for most of the season, but that's because the Edmonton Oilers continue to put the pressure on, as they have now 76 points to Vegas's 73, and the Oilers with just 59 games played. So they have 3 games in hand on the Golden Knights and 4 games in hand on the Vancouver Canucks, while being 9 points back. So those games in hand we talked about a couple of weeks ago with the Oilers, they're starting to take advantage of those and pushing themselves into that second spot in the division. And if you look at the Golden Knights, 2-7-1 in their last 10 games. They have just, it seems like most everything has gone wrong for them here over this stretch. But obviously, some big news that Mark Stone was put on injured reserve, and that is obviously a huge blow for this Golden Knights team. You think about all the different things that he does, in addition to being one of their go-to scorers, but also just being a integral piece of their leadership group. And so you not only have to try to replace that on-ice production, but you lose that presence in the room too. And so Stone, in the midst of a season in which he had 53 points in 56 games, and with him on injured reserve, it's no shock that the Golden Knights have dropped to, if you look at their number of points since February 20th, which was the last game that Stone played in, the Golden Knights are 30th in the NHL with a 1-5-1 record. They have 3 points in their last 7 games. And you look at the peripheral numbers, the Golden Knights still putting some goals on the board, 3.43 goals per game over that 7-game stretch. But they're giving up 5 goals per game. And the goalie stats for both Adin and Logan Thompson Adin Hill at 1-3 with a 4.57 goals against average and an 876 save percentage. Logan Thompson, in his 2 starts, he is 0-2-1 in his last 3 appearances, which were 2 starts. He's got a 4.94 goals against average and an 844 save percentage in that same time frame. The Golden Knights, their power play has dipped to 18.8%. On Locked On Wild, I've used the benchmark of if you can be above a 20% power play in the NHL, that's where you really see some of those good teams in that metric. You get to 22, 23, 24%. Those are your good power plays. Golden Knights down to 18.8. The penalty kill has been at 80% over the last 7 games, but you're mostly just getting carved in 5-on-5 play over this stretch, and so it comes at a pivotal time for this Vegas Golden Knights team as we move into the month of March. With April as well, there's still obviously plenty of time to get yourself back on track, but it feels like this is going to be a week in which the Vegas Golden Knights make a sizable addition to their roster to try to fill that spot. We've seen rumblings on X that the Golden Knights are looking to add at least one of the top names on the market. Jake Guentzel is a hotly contested name that the Pittsburgh Penguins are hoping to have resolution on by the end of tomorrow. So they're hoping to move this along quickly. And with the fact that the Golden Knights now find themselves in that 3rd spot in the division, that could be the kick that they need to be able to make something like this happen, to show their team that, hey, we're still in this. We're not, we're not thrown in the towel. It's just a matter of trying to get back on track and kind of recollect yourselves after a rough skid. And this Vegas Golden Knights team, they've had rough skids in the past. They got off to such a good start on the season, 11-0-1, but they've had stretches where they've lost 5 out of 6 before, even this season. So it's nothing new for this Golden Knights team. It's the price of doing business, and with the veterans they have on the team, they've got plenty of time to get themselves back on track. But do not be surprised if the Golden Knights do go out and try to make an acquisition before Friday's deadline to just kind of lift the spirits of the team and to help nudge them back in the right direction towards the top of those Pacific Division standings. So and Nick and I talked about this even as far back as December. The Golden Knights had a stretch in which they lost 6 out of 7. They were giving up a ton of goals. That was a stretch in which Adin Hill was injured. And so obviously getting him back, you look at the numbers for Hill since he came back into the picture for the Golden Knights. And his numbers they're not the Adin Hill level that we saw at the end of the season, but still pretty solid since he came back to the Golden Knights roster. So just a matter of them trying to get themselves back on track for a full push here in the month of March towards the postseason come April. So we go from that to another Pacific Division team that is potentially going to take a player they acquired and flip said player to try to make a bigger splash. We'll talk about the Vancouver Canucks as well as the Calgary Flames in a little bit of a weird spot themselves as we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Sleeper. And as we hit the final 2 months of the season, there is still plenty of time for you to win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether players like Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, or Kirill Kaprizov record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. It is so easy. You can set your lineup in less than 60 seconds. And if you love the NHL, and other sports, you can play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, MLB, and college football on Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Reminder for you, with the trade deadline coming up on Friday, we will have coverage throughout the network of any big deals that happen ahead of the deadline. So make sure to keep a close eye on your favorite team's Locked On show for breaking reaction to any big trades that happen. And Nick and I will have a recap of some of the biggest for you next week on Western Conference Tuesday for Locked On NHL. So I want to go to the Calgary Flames because they find themselves in an interesting situation because they are, they're one of those teams that is kind of still in the mix. They're 7 points back of the Nashville Predators with 21 games to play. They're 6-4 in their last 10. But you look at the fact that they have already traded Chris Tanev and the fact that there are ongoing rumors surrounding the New Jersey Devils being hotly pursuing Jacob Markstrom to be their goalie of the future going forward. This is interesting because you start kind of deadline season by trading Tanev to the Dallas Stars. At that point, you give the signal of, okay, we're gonna take a step back. We're gonna trade some assets here, and we're going to kind of reevaluate things. A position that I think a lot of people expected the Calgary Flames would be in coming into this season anyway. But now we've seen since, and this goes back to last week even, a tweet from David Pagnotta. The Devils tried to circle back, but the Flames are telling people they now plan on keeping Markstrom for the rest of this season. And that was because the Flames didn't want to give off the impression that they were selling that it would have had they moved Markstrom to the New Jersey Devils. The original trade got kind of tangled up in some salary retention, and the Flames the Devils were apparently willing to take on a majority of, if not the whole contract, to try to fix their goaltending situation. And the Flames then are like, nah, we're good. But there are reports too that this will be revisited in the summer, in the offseason, that the Devils are committed to this, they're committed to seeing this through and trying to make Jacob Markstrom their guy to solidify their goaltending situation and build around a team that has a ton of other talents. But the question I find myself asking is, if the Calgary Flames are currently 7 points out and are kind of caught in the middle. There have been rumblings about the St. Louis Blues potentially fielding offers on Pavel Buchnevich. And we will see who kind of steps out of frame as a seller between now and the deadline. But it's just funny to me, as the host that covers Locked on Wild, that up until the last couple of games, the Wild were still going for it. They're still swinging, still trying to keep themselves within the conversation for a wild card spot. But you have two different teams in front of you that are at various stages just not super interested in continuing to try to fight for a wild card spot. And so it may be at this point in the season, with 20 games to play, that Nashville has done enough. And Nashville has had moments in the past in which they kind of looked like they were going to be more of a seller than a buyer. It just, that wild card position is finally starting to get some clarity after being mostly a mess for the last month plus. So as of right now, Los Angeles Kings and the Nashville Predators are your wild card teams. St. Louis is within 5 points. They're closest to trying to have a say in it, but Calgary's 7 back. Seattle is 7 back. The Wild are 8 back, and Arizona has already taken themselves out of the running. So the field gets tighter in the Western Conference. And speaking of the field getting tighter in the West, Chris Johnston of The Athletic and TSN tweeted this out earlier today. With the Canucks believed to be among those pursuing Jake Guentzel, word is they've had discussions about potentially flipping Elias Lindholm to the Blues as part of the machinations to make it happen. Nothing concrete in place at this time, still lots of moving parts. It makes sense now that the Canucks can move Elias Pettersson off of their priorities list because they got the extension done. It makes sense that they try to also continue to remind people that they are the top team in the West by making a big move at the deadline to try to take advantage of a real opportunity that they have to make a run. The rest of the Western Conference, Edmonton has been fantastic lately, but obviously we know what Edmonton brings to the table. A lot of offense. Goaltending is extremely hit or miss. And their defense is a problem at times. The Vegas Golden Knights obviously have been struggling lately. And you look at the Central Division teams. The Central Division, Winnipeg, Dallas, and Colorado are all capable of beating anybody else in the West, but Vancouver's got a legitimate shot to represent the Western Conference in the Stanley Cup playoffs and the Stanley Cup final. And then you look at who you would play over in the East. Florida and Boston have kind of separated themselves from the pack, with the New York Rangers also being part of that top level. And so if you're going to go against a Florida team that just does a fantastic job at preventing goals via great defense and great goaltending, makes sense for you to go try to add a scorer that you can throw into your top 6 in Jake Guentzel, who can give you another weapon to just make you, just separate you further from the rest of the pack. And so credit to Vancouver for being in the mix, for trying to get some impact players to further kind of pull them up to the top of these Western Conference standings. Now, as far as the rest of the West goes, we have already seen some rumblings, and this just coming down the pipeline today, that the Arizona Coyotes sell-off could start as early as today. So we'll take a look at some of the latest surrounding Jason Zucker, as well as the other teams in the West that should be looking to do the same. All that coming up as we finish today's episode of Locked On NHL after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Again, a reminder to keep an eye on your favorite Locked On NHL show for breaking news and breaking reaction to any trades that happen between now and Friday's deadline. 2 p.m. Central Time is when the trade deadline kicks in. So should be a frantic push to the finish, including a tweet from Craig Morgan of Phoenix Sports. Per source, Coyotes forward Jason Zucker will be held out of tonight's lineup for, wait for it, trade-related reasons. So the official sell-off for the Arizona Coyotes is underway. And if you are looking at the Coyotes roster here this season, you've got some appealing pieces that could definitely bring you prospects or draft picks at the deadline. You've got veterans such as Jason Zucker. You've got Nick Bjugstad, who has 13 goals this season. The big one that was drawing a ton of trade discussion is Matt Dumba. And there were reports that Dumba could fetch as high as a first-round pick if he was dealt before the deadline, which is a very high price to be asking for a guy who is, to his credit, still playing on average 20 minutes a night, but has 9 total points in 57 games. And if you look at Dumba's recent stretch of play, he has gone since February 21st without a single point. His only goal in the last 7 games was against the Colorado Avalanche. Actually had 2 points that night against the Avs in a 4-3 loss for the Coyotes. But he's a veteran guy. He's played 20-plus minutes a night pretty much every game since February started. And going back to January, he did the same. So he is a durable defenseman. He'll give you 20 minutes a night. And as we saw at the end of his run with the Minnesota Wilds, capable of mixing in that physicality too. And so will it be a first-round pick for Dumba? That remains to be seen. But the Coyotes should definitely be fielding offers on several players here as the rest of the week goes by. Other teams that should be selling, in my humble opinion here in the Western Conference, include the Minnesota Wilds. And it sounds as though they have had some calls on players like Brandon Duhaime, Connor Dewar. Zach Bogosian is not going anywhere because he just signed a 2-year extension. That coming down the pipe here as we record today's episode. So Bogosian staying put, but you could still potentially see Pat Maroon dealt if he's able to come back from his injury and show that he's still got a little something in the tank. The Wild should definitely be selling. And beyond that, I mean, the Calgary Flames and the Seattle Kraken, 7 points out. They do both have a game in hand against the Nashville Predators. So let's say you win that game and all of a sudden you're 5 points out. I would say that I would say if you think you can make it, then you could give it a shot. But honestly, if the Calgary Flames, with how uneven their season has been this year, they're probably better suited just fielding some offers and just trying to add a little bit to that prospect pool ahead of next season. But Anaheim Ducks will definitely get some calls. San Jose Sharks should get some calls. Chicago obviously will get some calls as well. And Dallas has, as of right now, made the most impactful move outside of Vancouver, getting Chris Tanev, but the Vancouver Canucks getting Elias Lindholm. Those have been the two big ones here in the Western Conference so far. Sean Monahan going to the Winnipeg Jets, another impactful move that they made that has paid big dividends. Monahan has been just on a crazy scoring pace since he went to the Winnipeg Jets. And so don't be surprised if you see moves by the top three in both divisions. Who's going to make that big swing? That remains to be seen, because a big swing could be enough to put you on top of the rest of the West and give you a legitimate chance to make a run. All these teams, all three teams in the Central, all three teams for the most part in the Pacific, have those key elements. The goaltending. They've got the elite level top end players that can score when needed, and the good special teams play too. So all six of those teams you could make a case for being the ones that come out of the Western Conference. And so those are the teams that should definitely be looking to add a big fish here before the trade deadline hits. So again, we will make sure to keep an eye out for any big trades that come through. Make sure to keep an eye on your favorite Locked On NHL team show so that you don't miss any big trades or breaking news between now and the end of the trade deadline. Also, make sure to check out your favorite show's YouTube channels for those reaction videos, and we will break down all the biggest moves that were made at the deadline in the West on next week's episode of Western Conference Tuesday here on Locked On NHL. Make sure to follow the show throughout the week, too, for our wide array of Locked On NHL hosts, covering a wide range of topics here throughout the week. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any future Locked On NHL shows. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.